All right. All right, everyone. Hello, and welcome to the Nutrition Month 2022 Central Zone presentation. My name is Dina, and I am here with my colleagues Joanna and Annika, dietetic interns working with Alberta Health Services in the Central Zone to give this presentation today. To start, we just have a quick disclaimer. This material is intended for general information only and is provided on an as is, where is basis. So the theme of Nutrition Month 2022 is Unlock the Potential of Food, Ingredients for a Healthier Tomorrow. This year, we want to focus on how we can get the most out of our food while considering our environmental impact. We are encouraging Albertans to think about ways to maximize their food and minimize waste. This is the Nutrition Month calendar for 2022, which includes our 5 key themes for the 5 weeks of March, as well as challenges every day to help you get the most out of your food and reduce your environmental impact. You can scan the QR code in the bottom right corner to find this calendar and try some of the challenges for yourself. The key messages for Nutrition Month 2022 include rethinking your purchases, reducing food waste, reusing and repurposing, regrowing your food, and reconnecting with the land. I'll now let Joanna tell you about how you can rethink your purchases.
So as Dina mentioned, our first key message for Nutrition Month 2022 is rethinking your purchases. So during the first week of March, we really want to be thinking about planning our meals, making a list of what we need before going grocery shopping, being smart when going grocery shopping, and then also making sure to know what you have at home before going grocery shopping to avoid those unnecessary ingredients and buying them. So planning your meals, coming up with a few ideas or recipes that you would like to make for the week. So our first tip for this is to consider your schedule. So don't plan on making an elaborate meal on a night that you already have errands to run or appointments to attend. This is where having a whiteboard calendar, a planner, or agenda in your kitchen or on your fridge will really be a lifesaver. Setting some time aside on a Sunday, for example, to go grocery shopping and to do meal prep could save you a lot of time during the week when there's always a million other things that need your attention. Our second tip is to be flexible. So you don't need to plan out every meal and snack for the week. You can start by planning maybe 2 to 3 or 3 to 4 meals for the week and then seeing how it goes. Starting small is always better than not starting at all. So you can even take your kids or other family members along to the grocery store and have them come up with a few ideas of what they want to have for dinner one night of the week. And you may also have leftovers from bigger meals that you made earlier in the week. So this is where only planning 3 to 4 meals a week comes in really handy because you can reuse those leftovers in other recipes as well. The next thing we want to think about is keeping servings in mind. So you want to ask yourself how many people plan on eating the meal, what is their usual appetite, and how many servings will the recipe that you want to make provide. So an easy way of getting a recipe to feed more people, for example, is to add more filler ingredients. So thinking simple and uncomplicated, filler ingredients can be anything you have in your pantry on a day-to-day basis. So adding a filler ingredient like lentils to your ground beef mixture when making lasagna will not only get you more protein and fiber, but it will also make those portions a lot more filling. And then similarly, adding vegetables like potatoes, carrots, peas, frozen spinach, or kale to stews is another way you can really maximize the volume of the food that you're getting without putting in a lot of extra money, just a few extra ingredients that you may already have at home. Our fourth tip is to always look in the fridge first. So planning meals for the next week using what you have on hand before buying other ingredients. So getting the most out of your food by implementing also the first in, first out method in your kitchen. This method involves moving those older foods to the front of your fridge, freezer, and pantry, and placing newer items in the back. This will ensure that older products are used first and reduce the chance of using a new product while an older one is nearing its expiration date or best before date. Dina will actually talk a little bit about this more in the next and coming slides. Our fifth tip is to use fresh foods first. So using fresh vegetables and fruit earlier in the week will prevent them from going bad. You can always use frozen or canned vegetables and fruit later in the week when you run out of that fresh produce in your kitchen. And keeping fruits and vegetables in the right places in the fridge will also keep them fresh for longer. This will also be discussed a little later in the presentation as well. So next, we want to think double duty. So ask yourself the question, what other recipes could I make using this food item? So try and come up with 2 or 3 meals that you can make using that ingredient. And then buying those multi-purpose ingredients like canned beans that can be used in chili, soup, tacos will not only save you time when planning out meals, it will also allow you to use up those ingredients that you may not have thought to use otherwise. So thinking double duty is a whole lot easier when you have versatile ingredients, like I mentioned, in your pantry and fridge. So having basic multi-purpose ingredients on hand at all times could save you a lot of headache in the week. So bringing life to those leftovers when you're feeling uninspired by adding a few extra ingredients that you already have at home. For example, do you have leftover mac and cheese but aren't quite in the mood for eating it 2 times in a row? You can repurpose those leftovers by maybe making them into mac and cheese balls. So adding some flour and egg, Thai sweet chili sauce, and putting them either in cups and baking them, or you can deep fry them as well, but just for the healthier option, baking is definitely there. Alternatively, you can also freeze your leftovers. Dina will also talk about this a little later, but putting them into individual portions so you can just pull them whenever you need a meal in the week. Our final tip for when you're doing meal planning is to start at the beginning and bring it back to the basics. Make your go-to meals first, and then gradually try to incorporate a few new recipes each week. So you can plan meals for the week, and it doesn't need to be exquisite or following a meal plan per se. Just having a general idea of what you would like to eat in the coming week is a great starting point for when you're planning out meals and trying to have a grain, protein, and vegetable or fruit at all meals. In doing this, your meals will not only be more colorful, but they will also keep you full for a lot longer and give your body the nutrients and vitamins and minerals that it needs. So next, we want to look at making a list. And it sounds simple, right? It definitely saves us a lot of money and time in the grocery store instead of us wandering around and trying to remember what we have in the house and if the ingredients we have at home are still even good to be used. So our first tip for this is to kind of take stock before you shop. So checking your fridge, pantry, and freezer before going grocery shopping will keep you from buying those unnecessary ingredients that you probably already have at home. So while checking what you have at home, try thinking about what meals you can make with what you have on hand. You may already have everything you need for a recipe without even realizing it. Also, if you find that you are missing an ingredient for a recipe, try and think if there's something you already have at home that you can use in its place instead of just running to the grocery store for one ingredient. And you might find that you already have everything you need for something for a recipe at home without really realizing it either. Secondly, keeping a list and pen to go along with it on hand at all times. So having a notepad readily available for when something in your pantry or fridge runs out will make your life a whole lot easier when trying to plan meals for the week. Putting the list also somewhere where you can see it. You may want to consider placing it on the fridge or pantry door for easy access. And sticking to that list and bringing it along when you go grocery shopping will also be a huge lifesaver, and prevent you from buying those unnecessary ingredients and things that you didn't plan for. But I will turn it over to Dina, who's going to be talking about reducing your food waste.
All right. So within the key message of reducing your food waste, we will cover how to store your food to make it last longer, ways to ensure you're using up your food so it's not going to waste, and tips for reducing your food waste at meal times. So to start, storing your food to make it last. The first tip to storing your food to make it last is to make sure you're keeping your perishable foods cool. You want to have your fridge set to 0 to 4 degrees Celsius and your freezer set to -18 degrees Celsius or lower to ensure food remains fresh and does not spoil too quickly. If you do not have a thermometer built into your refrigerator, you can purchase one online or at a local retailer. Ensure you're placing your fridge thermometer on a shelf in your fridge and not on the door of the fridge, as the door is often warmer than the rest of your fridge. After preparing a meal or a snack, ensure that you're refrigerating or freezing your leftovers within 2 hours. Leaving leftovers out at room temperature for longer than 2 hours can increase the risk of food spoilage and food safety concerns. Foods that are refrigerated should be eaten within 3 days, and foods that are stored in the freezer should be eaten within 3 months. Store meats near the bottom of your refrigerator in their original containers. If the original container is not leak-proof, consider placing it in an additional bowl or container to prevent any liquids from getting on other items in your fridge. Meat should never be defrosted at room temperature, such as on the counter, as this keeps the meat in the danger zone, which is between 4 to 60 degrees Celsius for an extended period of time, and allows for harmful bacteria growth and spoilage. The safest way to thaw frozen meats is to place the product in the refrigerator to thaw overnight. If using this method, it is recommended that you cook the item within 2 to 5 days of thawing, depending on the type of meat. Poultry, ground meat, and seafood should be used within about 2 days, whereas products such as steaks, pork chops, and roasts can be used within 3 to 5 days of thawing. With our busy lives, it can be easy to forget to defrost the meat for dinner the night before. And therefore, if this happens, the second safest way for thawing your meat is to place your meat in a sealed bag and submerge it in cold water, which should be changed about every 30 minutes. Using this method will likely take between 1 to 3 hours for standard cuts of meat to thaw. Now, if it's approaching dinner time and you do not have time to defrost your meat using the cold water method, you may choose to microwave your meat products to defrost them. And if you choose this method, you should cook the product immediately after thawing, and do not wait to cook the product, and do not refreeze the product if you've used the microwave to thaw your product. Some fruits and vegetables continue to ripen after they have been picked, such as grapes, mushrooms, and stone fruits like peaches and avocados. These should be stored in a low humidity crisper drawer. And some fruits and vegetables do not continue to ripen after they've been picked and therefore will wilt more quickly. These items, such as leafy greens, carrots, broccoli, should be stored in the high humidity crisper drawer. Our next tip to ensuring you're storing your food to last is keeping it clear. And this means storing your food in clear containers to keep track of what you have. You can also use a piece of tape or washable markers to label when the food was prepared. This way you can ensure you're using up your older leftovers first. Our third tip to ensuring you're storing your food to make it last is to implement, as Joanna went over, the first in, first out method in your kitchen to reduce the chances of using a new product while your older products expire. Keeping food out of the door for most refrigerators will also help to ensure food products stay fresher for longer. As I said, the door is usually the warmest part of your fridge. So items such as milk, yogurt, cheese, or meat products should be kept out of the door to help prevent spoilage and keep your items fresher for longer. Use your door of the refrigerator for more long-lasting items such as ketchup, mustard, jams, etc. Lastly, some final tips to storing your food to make it last longer include keeping a magnetic whiteboard on your deep freezer to keep track of what's in the bottom of your freezer. That first in, first out method can also be implemented when using your deep freezer. If you notice you have items such as meat, bread, milk, fruits, or vegetables that you don't think you'll use up before they spoil, you could freeze them and defrost them when needed. With fruits and vegetables, try freezing them in a single layer on a baking sheet first, and then transferring them into an airtight container or a bag to prevent the pieces from freezing together. Some vegetables should also be blanched before freezing, which Annika will talk more about later in the presentation. The next topic we will cover to help reduce food waste is using it up. Wilted vegetables often get thrown out prematurely. However, we encourage you not to give up on your wilted vegetables. One way to bring life back into these wilted vegetables is to fill your sink or a large container with ice water. Soak the vegetables for about 5 to 10 minutes, and you may find that lettuce will crunch, Bendy carrots will strengthen, and broccoli will find its strength. If vegetables are beyond the point of reviving, they can still be used in dishes such as stir fries or stews. To prevent premature browning and wilting, avoid slicing your foods before or until you're ready to use them. If you like chopped vegetables for easier meal preparation or snacking, try storing them in water to preserve freshness. A small amount of lemon or lime juice or a pinch of salt can also be added to cut up fruits and vegetables to prevent browning and prolong freshness. Lemon or lime juice can be added directly to the produce, and when using the salt method, try soaking your cut up produce in cold salt water, drain and dry with a paper towel, and store in an airtight container in your fridge. The last topic we will cover to help reduce food waste is reducing food waste at meal times. Involving children or other family members in menu planning, grocery shopping, and meal preparation can help ensure that meals prepared include something everyone will enjoy. This can also help get people more excited for meal times. Serving smaller portions or serving meals family style can help prevent extra food from going to waste. If serving family style, children should be monitored initially until they learn what is a good portion for them. Start with a small portion and take more if you're still hungry. Saving leftovers or making enough food for 2 meals instead of 1 can help reduce food waste as well as cooking time. Leftovers can be an easy lunch option or stored in the freezer for an easy meal another time. Ensuring snacks are not too close to a mealtime can also ensure everyone is hungry at those mealtimes and less food is wasted. A good rule of thumb is to try to limit snacking about 2 to 3 hours before a meal.
So next we'll be talking about the third key message of Nutrition Month, which is reusing and repurposing. Whether this is reusing a takeout container to pack your lunch in or soaking banana peels in water to use for your plants. Every little bit helps to lessen waste and keep your garbage bin emptier for longer. So reusing containers, it seems like a simple task, right? But yet, due to the immediate convenience of discardable plastic bags and containers, we often opt to use those instead. But if you think of it and give it some further thought, reusable containers are even more convenient and cheaper in the long run as well. Choosing reusable doesn't have to be hard either. Keeping a few reusable shopping bags in the trunk of your car so you have them readily available whenever you need them. If you've ever had your groceries spill on the way to your car, you will know the pain that I'm talking about. But just keeping a few reusable bags in the back of your car will save you a lot of hassle in the future. When it comes to water bottles, reusable water bottles are another must-have when trying to lessen waste. So having a water bottle handy to help serve as a daily reminder to drink more water. So why not just get a reusable one instead, which can last longer as well. Better yet, you can even reuse glass bottles that you once used for lemonade or juice, and you can even redecorate them so that they will be convenient, durable, and nice looking as well. Having a Pinterest-worthy pantry or fridge with matching food storage and prep containers is great, but simply making the most of what you have already, food and food storage wise, is what makes all the difference in the end. After all, we are just looking to minimize waste and maximize what we already have on hand, be it food, takeout containers, or glass jars previously used to store other items. You can even try using beeswax paper instead of plastic wrap next time you are wrapping your sandwich for lunch. Rethinking your food scraps. So when you start seeing scraps merely as ingredients that can be repurposed in other areas of your day-to-day living, you will find that your perspective of what food waste is and using the odds and ends of ingredients change dramatically. Making the most of scraps. So before throwing out your leftover coffee grounds, add some to the soil of your plants. This will keep insects away. Or you can mix them into water or an oil. And then you have kind of a natural body exfoliator as well. You can also use those leftover eggshells. They can just be ground up and added to baking recipes for extra calcium. To do this, you will need to boil them first in water for 2 minutes. And then after boiling your shells, transferring them onto a baking sheet, baking them at 225 Fahrenheit for 45 to 50 minutes or until they're kind of completely dried out. And then once they're dried out, blending them into a powder using a blender, coffee, or spice grinder. So next time you're making your favorite muffin recipe, for example, adding some eggshell powder to the batter, pouring, portioning, and baking your muffins like you would usually. And then tell me that you can't feel your bones getting stronger from that. Thinking twice, your food scraps might suffice. So trying to eat more vegetables on the daily, try baking potato and carrot peels into chips to snack on between meals. It's as easy as lining a baking pan with parchment paper, quickly drizzling some canola or olive oil over those leftover peels, and maybe adding a seasoning of your choosing, and then baking them at 425 degrees Fahrenheit for 30 minutes or until that desired crispiness. Then fall, we all know it's squash season then. So next time you are carving out that pumpkin for Halloween or making butternut squash soup, setting the seeds aside and baking them for a pre-meal snack instead of immediately tossing them in the garbage bin is another way we can reduce waste. We can add some extra flavor to your pasta dishes by mixing some pasta water into the sauce. So you can even take it a step further from this and flavor your pasta while it's cooking with herbs and spices such as basil, oregano, onion, or garlic salt. You can use this leftover pasta water to make broth or use it in bread recipes when you need to add water. Believe me, once you try it, there's no going back. If you're in need of some green around your house, putting that sweet potato that you have lying around the house or leftover avocado seed from some recently made guacamole to good use by letting them soak in water until they sprout and then putting them in soil until they make little plants. You will have self-made houseplants in no time. I will now, I think, also cookbooks for inspiration. So it is a daunting task sometimes to know what to or even where to start when trying to make the most of your food scraps. So just trying to get our thoughts rolling, you might want to consider flipping through a few cookbooks for inspiration or consulting a friend or family member to hear what they might already be doing to reduce their carbon footprint. There are countless books available in-store and online about repurposing food waste and living a less wasteful life. So feel free to peruse the internet or a nearby bookstore and try to find one that fits your needs. I'll now turn it over to Dina, who's going to be talking about regrowing your food, or Annika actually, to regrowing your food, sorry.
Thank you, Joanna. Now I'll carry us to the end of the presentation today. The fourth key message is regrow your food. This section will cover regrowing your produce scraps, the process of making sourdough, and how to limit waste here. And the third item we'll cover here are the whys and the how-tos of composting. All right, so what we mean by regrowing your produce scraps is instead of throwing away, for example, the bottom of a green onion Where the roots usually grow, you can take that bottom piece of the green onion that you might usually be throwing away, and you can regrow new green onions from it. It's almost just that easy. I'll explain in the next slide. So there are a few vegetable scraps that only require water to initiate new growth. Beet and carrot tops are an example of this. To grow the greens of your vegetables, here are a few examples of the steps that you can follow. First, you'll want to wash your vegetables before cutting into them. Then remove the stem and the leaves, which you can use in another recipe. Second, separate the main part of the vegetable from the top part of the vegetable, because the top is where you'll grow new leaves and stems from. Then you'll want to place the top of the vegetable into a dish, for example, in a shallow bowl, and add just enough water to the dish so that the top of the water covers the top of the vegetable. Because plants need sunlight to grow, keep your little plant in a sunny spot. You'll want to change the water every 1 to 2 days to keep the water level consistent with the top curve of the vegetable. Then wait a couple of days and you'll see new leaves begin to grow. In just a few days or so, you'll have new carrot or beet greens. You can use these greens in salads, in stir fries, or simply just saute them as a side with your dish. Here are some foods that all you need to do is pot in some soil for regrowth. For example, old sprouted potatoes can be regrown to produce brand new potatoes. Before you plant, you want to make sure that your potatoes have eyes, which are small bumps or divots where sprouts will eventually grow from. If sprouts have not yet grown on your potato, place the potato in a cool, dark place for about 2 weeks to allow for sprouting. This could be, for example, in a cabinet close to the ground. Once you have sprouts growing, you are ready to plant the potato. Small potatoes can be planted directly into soil, but for larger potatoes, cut the potato in half, making sure that each piece has at least 2 sprouts growing. You'll want to make sure that the potatoes feel dry to the touch, and then you can plant them in soil 2 to 3 inches deep. You can plant them outside or inside in a large container that has sun exposure. In terms of watering your potatoes, you don't need to start watering until you see roots begin to form above the soil. I won't review the process here for ginger root or sweet potato, but they do follow a very similar process to that of potatoes, which I just outlined. Other scraps do best with an initial water treatment, and then they can be transferred to soil. Lettuce, celery, leeks, and herbs are just a few examples of foods that can be regrown by placing the stem in some water, and then once roots and new leaves start to grow, they can be transferred to soil. You can keep these plants either inside or outside as long as they have sunlight and water. Lettuce and celery will need to be watered daily, where herbs can be watered 1 or 2 times a week. All right, so now I've explained the how of regrowing your food scraps, but what about the why? What are the benefits here? First off, growing your own plants from scraps is environmentally friendly. If you use your own regrown produce, you're not purchasing items from the store that have undergone packaging and shipping. You'll also reduce the amount of waste going into the landfill by reusing food scraps that you might usually be throwing away. It also saves money. Produce is expensive, especially herbs, so by growing your own, you can save on your grocery bill. When we grow our own foods, we also foster that relationship with the food that we're eating and with the land. Fourth, all of the foods that I mentioned here for regrowing require minimal equipment and space, meaning that you don't need a full backyard or lots of resources to regrow your food. And finally, what's more accessible than growing produce right at home? You'll have some of your favorite herbs and salad components right at your fingertips. Another item that you can grow in your home, especially if you were bitten by the pandemic-induced sourdough bug, is sourdough starter. If you do have experience making sourdough, you're likely familiar with the term sourdough starter discard. So sourdough starting can unfortunately lead to a lot of waste, as feeding the starter requires discarding most of it and feeding it with more flour and water. So here we'll review the steps to making a sourdough, and we'll also talk about ways to repurpose that discard so it doesn't have to be waste. Although making a sourdough starter may seem like a really big task and only for those who are baking enthusiasts, many of the steps are really similar and they repeat themselves. So what you'll need here is a large mason jar, Size of the jar can vary, but for the ingredients listed here, you'll want one that can hold up to 4 cups. A weigh scale, which isn't needed, but it can be helpful to make your measurements more precise. A thermometer, which again isn't necessary, but it can be helpful to know that your sourdough starter is growing at an optimal temperature, which is 22 to 30 degrees Celsius. So it can be happy on a counter, but sometimes in a warmer environment can help it grow quicker and initiate growth. And then the last items here are flour and water, which are the only 2 ingredients which are actually needed to grow a starter. Now let's go into the steps for the starter, which are split into 6 days. So on day 1, we'll want to measure the water and the flour. For the recipe here, I used 120 grams of flour and 120 grams of water, but you can also use smaller ratios than this if you want a smaller starter. If you're not using a scale, this 120 grams would equal about 1 cup of flour and half a cup of water. Mix the water and flour in your glass or jar until they're fully incorporated. The mixture here will be thick like toothpaste or peanut butter, which can be hard to work with, but as the starter begins to metabolize the flour, it'll become more runny. Then place a lid on the jar and cover it with a damp cloth and let the mixture sit out either in a warm environment between 22 to 30 degrees Celsius or on your counter for about 48 hours. During this time, if you're looking at it, you should begin to see some bubbles start to form. So day 2 here is 48 hours later, and hopefully by this time you start to see some bubbles forming at the top of the starter. If not, allow the starter to sit for 12 more hours and then check it again. Once you see bubbles forming, discard all but half of the starter. Make sure here that you're not throwing away the discard because we'll talk of a few ways to reuse that discard in a few slides. Then feed that half a cup of starter that was measured with 1 cup of flour and half a cup of water. Mix the flour and water until they're incorporated and then loosely place the lid back on and allow the mixture to sit again for 24 hours. So this takes us to day 3. After 24 hours, hopefully you're able to see more bubbles and hopefully you're able to also see some slide marks on your jar. The slide marks indicate that your starter is rising and falling, which is a sign of a healthy starter that's metabolizing the flour. And it also means that it's hungry and that it's ready for another feeding. Depending on the temperature of your home, again, the starter may be more or less active. So it's important to look for these signs of hunger. Once you see these signs, like the bubbling, the rising and falling, or a runny starter, then you can feed it again with that half a cup of water and 1 cup of flour. Then again, let it to sit for 12 to 24 hours. So this takes us to day 4. After 12 hours, check for signs of activity. If your starter looks like it's active and hungry, then you can feed the starter. And if you don't, wait another 12 hours. So you may, at this point, be feeding your starter every 24 hours, every 12 hours, or in really warm environments, even every 6 hours. It really depends on the temperature of your home and also on the flour that you're using. Once you see this activity, you can discard again all but half of the starter and then feed it and allow it to sit for another 6 to 24 hours. By day 5, your starter should be at a point where it is doubling in size consistently between feedings, at which point you are likely ready for a final feeding. If it doesn't double in size by day 5, though, don't worry, just keep following this process of feeding it when you see activity, and it'll get there. It'll get to the point where it is doubling in size. So my last day here is day 6, but your last day will be as long as it takes to see that consistent rise and fall in your starter. Once you see this, then your starter is ready for one final feeding. It looks different on the amount of flour and water you're using, but here we'll discard all but 1/3 of a cup of that starter and then add 1 cup of flour and half a cup of water for the final feeding. And at this point, your starter should double in size between 4 and 6 hours. Once you're at this point, your starter is ready to bake with.
Welcome to this quick tutorial on making a sourdough starter. The first step.
Joanna, do you mind pausing? I'm so sorry. Yes, so here's a little video that I hope clarifies some of the steps that I just discussed. It's about 5 minutes in length, so now we can play it.
Is to measure out 125 grams of flour, and 125 grams of water, which works out to be about a heaping cup of flour and half a cup of water. I used whole wheat flour.
Oh gosh, I don't know why it's going weird. My apologies, guys.
Welcome to this quick tutorial on making a sourdough starter. The first step is to measure out 125 grams of flour and 125 grams of water, which works out to be about a heaping cup of flour and half a cup of water. I used whole wheat flour here to offer more nutrients in the first feeding, but you can use any type of flour that you like. Then you'll mix all the ingredients together and place a cap on and leave it for 48 hours. After 48 hours, pour out about half a cup of the starter. The remaining amount in the jar is considered discard. What I did with the discard is I added it to a bowl and kept it in the fridge to use in other recipes such as brownies or pizza crust. Then take the half a cup of sourdough starter that you initially saved and add 125 grams of water and 125 grams of flour. So this is called feeding the starter, and what you're doing is you're giving it food to grow and metabolize. Continue to mix the flour until it's fully incorporated, and then add the dough into a clean mason jar. All I did was clean my old one out, and the reason for wanting a clean one is so that you're able to see slide marks on the jar, which indicate that your starter is rising and falling, and this is a good sign of a healthy starter. So then you will just ensure everything's incorporated and set a cap on lightly and leave it for 24 more hours. 24 hours after the second feeding, you can see that there are slide marks along the mason jar, which indicates that the starter has risen and fallen again. And these are signs of a healthy starter that is metabolizing the flour that you're feeding it. So what I'll do here now is save half a cup of the starter, and I'll discard the rest and save it for other recipes. You'll take that initial starter that you're saving, the half a cup, and add it to a bowl where you will then proceed to feed it again. So giving it that 125 grams of flour and 125 grams of water, and then mix until well incorporated. Once I fed my starter, I'm going to add it back into that clean mason jar again. And what I'm going to do this time is I'm going to add an elastic to the mason jar at the height of the starter when I first add it into the mason jar. And this is completely optional, but what it can do is give you a measurement of how much your starter is falling and rising if you compare it to that mark on the mason jar where the elastic is. Then all I'll do is set a cap on it and leave it to rest for 12 hours. After 12 hours, I didn't see much activity, so I ended up waiting until 24 hours to feed it again. I didn't see any rising and falling action, but I did see a few bubbles, so I decided to pour out my half a cup and feed it with the 125 grams of flour and 125 grams of water. Many factors can influence the activity of your starter, such as the flour you're using, the water, and the temperature of your home. So again, once you feed your starter, you will add it to the mason jar and then allow it to sit for about 12 hours. At this point, by day 4, you should be seeing a consistent rise and fall in your starter where it peaks at about 6 or 8 hours and then begins to fall in height. Afterwards, here, I wasn't seeing that consistent rise and fall every 12 hours that we do want to see, but I was still checking in every 24 hours to see if there were any signs of activity. So I will fast forward through the next few days of checking the starter every 24 hours and feeding it as long as I did see at least a few bubbles. Starters can take anywhere from 6 days to 2 weeks to mature. I had mine going for about 10 days before it was ready. An indication for a mature starter is if the starter is continuously rising and falling after feeding to the point where it is doubling in size at its peak. Once you have this, you're ready to make a sourdough bread. On day 10, my starter was at a point where it doubled in size within 6 hours, which is an indication that your starter has enough activity to be able to leaven a loaf of bread. A great way to verify if your starter is ready to leaven a loaf of bread is to perform the float test. So all you do is drop a small amount of your starter into a glass of water. And if the starter floats, then your starter is ready to use for baking. If it doesn't, all you'll want to do is continue feeding for a few more days until it successfully floats in water. To make my sourdough bread, I combined my fed starter with flour, salt, and water. There are many different recipes out there and the procedures do vary, so I won't explain my process today, but I will share with you the end product. Here is my little sourdough, and the recipes don't end here. There are so many recipes available which incorporate sourdough discard into the ingredients so that you don't have to throw away your discard. Some recipes that I've tried out that include sourdough discard include pizza crust, cinnamon buns, and brownies. And this is such a great way to get creative, but also reduce waste when you're making your sourdough.
All right. So I hope that this video helped make more sense of the steps in making a sourdough starter and also inspired you to try making one at home. This was my first attempt in making a sourdough. And of course, it wasn't without a few hiccups, but I do promise it's worth the effort. If you do make a sourdough, don't forget to name the starter. I named mine Stacy the starter. All right, so if I had $1 for every time that I said discard in that video and in the steps that I reviewed, I would have a lot of change. And there would also be a lot of waste if you were to actually throw away the discard here. So here are a few ideas to help minimize waste by reducing a few ways to reduce waste by reusing your discard in some delicious recipes. You can repurpose the discard to make a plethora of different recipes. A quick internet search will help you find tons of recipes to use your discard in so that it never has to be a wasted discard again. Alternatively, you can also dehydrate your discard to make a crunchy topping for salads, stir fries, desserts, or even use it as a thickening agent for sauces and soups. Composting is our third topic in this section of regrowing your food. And although composting isn't regrowing your food per se, we are taking food scraps and turning them into something that isn't waste. Composting is the process where bacteria and microbes break down organic matter, such as kitchen scraps, into a valuable fertilizer which can enrich soil. This is called compost. So why compost? A big component of diverting foods from the landfill is the use of composting. On a chemical level, composting food is better for the environment than sending it to a landfill because discarded food that decays in landfills releases high amounts of methane, which is a greenhouse gas and accelerates atmospheric warming. Compost also enriches soil and actually promotes higher yields of agricultural crops. The bacteria that break down materials to create compost use carbon and nitrogen and also require a moist but aerated environment. Therefore, there are 4 key components to a basic compost at home. The first is green material, which can come from vegetables, fruit, coffee grounds, and plant trimmings. These will all produce the nitrogen for the compost. Brown material can come from napkins, newspaper, wood chips, hay, and leaves, and these produce the carbon for the compost. Water, the compost will get through consistent watering. And then the final ingredient here is air, meaning that you just don't want your compost to be in a completely covered environment. There are generally 2 ways that we can compost. The first is to compost at home, where the process of food to compost takes place in your backyard. There's a simple and a more complex method for composting at home, but both will yield really great nutrient-rich compost for soil. Home composting doesn't allow for the same amount of heat to be created as in industrial composting, and therefore it's not suitable for meat, fish, dairy, and compostable cutlery. The second option here is to partake in a municipal composting program where offered. This generally does have a lower commitment because you don't need to care for it like you would a compost at home. Municipal programs do look different in different areas, so be sure to access resources that explain the do's, the don'ts, and the how-tos of your municipal composting program. So the 5th and the final key message for Nutrition Month 2022 is reconnect with the land. The topics covered here include the impact of agriculture, planting your own garden, container gardening, harvesting your garden, how to winterize plants, and connecting with local farmers. So let's dive into this last section. First, we'll look at the impact of agriculture on the environment. We strongly encourage the consumption of fruits and vegetables, but it's also really important to be aware of the impact that the produce that we consume has on the environment. Mass-produced crops and agriculture occupying half of the world's habitable land, to the packaging and transportation, the dilemma and sustainability of our produce is of growing concern. The majority of produce that we buy in the store comes from mass-produced crops, which contribute to deforestation and also consume a lot of water, where actually 70% of freshwater withdrawals globally are used for agriculture. These mass-produced crops also reduce the planet's biodiversity. Pesticides are also used on many produce. The problem with this is that runoff from areas treated with pesticides can pollute streams, ponds, lakes, and wells, which can harm plants and animals and also contaminates groundwater. Then there's the transportation, packaging, and retail of the produce that we eat. These all require energy and resource inputs and can further contribute to greenhouse gas emissions. So what can we do about this? Growing your own garden for produce is one way that we can decrease our environmental footprint and also connect more with the food that we eat and with the land. So when can we start gardening? Gardening can actually begin in the winter months, where you can plant seeds or seedlings in your home and then transplant them outside when the weather is warmer. We want to wait until there is no longer a risk of overnight frost to start planting our plants outside. And typically this is around May long weekend in Alberta. Common vegetables that can be grown during the winter months or started during the winter months include broccoli, Brussels sprouts, and cabbage. Don't grow your vegetables outside in the winter, only start them in your homes and then transplant them in the spring. Because Alberta is not the most weather forgiving province, not all vegetables and fruits grow well, but peas, beans, beets, tomatoes, and zucchinis are common vegetables that have success in Alberta. Fruits that do well in Alberta include berries and raspberries, berries such as raspberries and Saskatoon berries, as well as rhubarb and apples. All right, so no garden space, no problem. If you don't have space for gardening, getting connected with a community garden or a community greenhouse is a great alternative. You can find out if a community garden is close to you by contacting your local community centers, your local church, or a school nearby. If after some searching, you determine that your community doesn't have a community garden or a community greenhouse, you can consider starting your own community garden. If this is something that interests you, Alberta Health Services has a resource to help you navigate starting your own community garden. On the slide, there is a QR code, which brings you to that resource that AHS has created. And we can also share this link with Ellen, who maybe it's possible to have it shared along with the recorded presentation. Perfect, thanks, Joanna. Another option, if you have little or no garden space, is to start your own mini garden indoors. Some ideas of plants that grow well indoors are herbs, lettuce, green onion, tomatoes, hot peppers, potatoes, and carrots. You can start your seeds in a small container, or you can even repurpose eggshells, an egg carton, or a citrus rind to start your seeds in. Once they begin to grow, you'll want to transplant them into a larger container outside or inside, or into something like a yogurt container, a tin can, or a herb box. With all of these, you want to make sure that there's a hole at the bottom for excess water to drain out, and you'll also want to make sure that you have a sunny spot, whether it be outside or inside. All right, so now let's talk about harvesting the garden, which is when you can literally enjoy the fruits of your labor. Most gardens are ready for harvest in the fall. There is quite a range for the time frame for harvesting, and it can also depend on when you start your garden. Each plant has a different length of time from seed to harvest, so it's important to consider this when you are planning your garden. You can also refer to farmers or other backyard gardeners in your area to get a sense of what grows well in your region and times of harvest. The table here shows general harvesting timelines for different fruits and vegetables. You can see that there's quite a bit of variation from when they're ready to be harvested, but typically it seems that most are ready between the months of July and October. Here are a few ideas of what you can do with your harvested vegetables and fruit. First, of course, you can eat anything from your garden fresh. There's nothing better than fresh picked fruits, vegetables, and herbs. You can also use your harvest in all kinds of recipes. Zucchini muffins, a fresh salsa with tomato, or roasted vegetables. There are so many good recipes out there. You can also use your harvest in all to freeze them for later use. For example, if you're freezing your veggies, you'll want to blanch them before, which means adding them to boiling water for 1 to 5 minutes, depending on the vegetable. Also consider the tip that Dina shared earlier on. To prevent vegetables from sticking together in the freezer, try freezing them on a tray where they're split apart, and then once they're frozen, you can add them to a freezer bag for longer storage. For general storage, make sure that you keep your produce in a cool, dark place to help maintain quality. You can also preserve your harvest by using some of the following methods. Apples and other fruits can be canned to make jellies, jams, and sauces. You can also dehydrate your fruits and vegetables to make apple, beet, and carrot chips, or dehydrate berries to add to granola or to add on top of yogurt parfaits. Vegetables can also be fermented. Some common vegetables for fermenting are cabbage, carrots, cauliflower, garlic, peppers, and turnips. Pickling is another great option that you can get creative with, and you can pickle your beets and carrots as well as cucumbers. If you are canning or pickling, make sure that you're following proper canning guidelines, as the environment can harbor harmful organisms such as those causing botulism. Health Canada has a really great resource to refer to when learning about safe canning methods. All right, so again, since we live in Alberta and the weather isn't the most garden accommodating year round, here are a few tips on preparing your gardens for the winter. Most plants that you grow in your garden are annuals. This means that they complete their life cycle within one growing season, meaning that once you harvest them, then they won't be regrowing back the following year. Therefore, when fall approaches, you can just remove them from your garden once you're finished picking the fruits from them. Perennials, on the other hand, are plants that grow back the following year, but in order to preserve the plant, you want to winterize it. Winterizing perennials looks different based on the plant's needs. Some plants may need to be kept inside or in a heated garage. For these, you'll want to plant them in pots that can accommodate transport inside, and you'll also want to make sure that you have heating lamps in your home to help them grow over the winter. You'll also want to make sure that you're watering them throughout to maintain their growth. Some herbs such as mint, garlic, and basil, as well as broccoli, asparagus, raspberries, strawberries, and grapes are considered to be perennials and will grow back the following year. And our last component of reconnecting with the land we'll touch on today is connecting with sustainable food sources. Great ways to get connected with sustainable food sources include supporting your local farmers markets, visiting farmers markets to connect with local farmers by collecting business cards, engaging in conversation, and asking any questions that you have to the farmers selling their products. Visiting restaurants that use locally grown and produced ingredients is also a great option. And last, since supermarkets and stores are increasingly including locally sourced products, looking out for these is a really great option as well. The Alberta government website has a link to a farmers market locator for all approved farmers markets in Alberta. Although it might not capture 100% of the markets near you, it can help you discover some new places to check out and support those local food sources. There is a QR code here again that you can scan, and it does take you to the link. But again, maybe we can send these resources to Ellen, and hopefully they're able to be posted with the recorded video from today. So that is all for today. Thank you so much for attending our presentation for Nutrition Month 2022. We hope that you learned more about ways to reduce your waste, maximize your food, and that you were inspired to get creative at home and in your community.
Well, thank you very much for the presentation, ladies. That was wonderful and very informative. I am going to open it up. If people have any questions, they can either put them in the chat box or they can unmute themselves and ask questions if you have any.
I do have one question about our presentation. Is it all right, Ellen, if we share those resources with you and then they can be shared along with the presentation?
Yes, absolutely. What we can do is we can put them with that connection or with that link that we'll have in there. We'll see how that works. So,
okay, sounds good. Thank you.
So anybody have any questions they want to ask or comments?
I have a comment for the young girls in that I was surprised actually in how much you guys actually talk about maintaining the land, and you know, certainly dietitians are much more equipped now than what I remember them as. How we seem to be going back to what we used to do before, like canning and all those kinds of things. So yeah, it was interesting. I certainly picked up a few tips. Thanks. It was a good presentation, guys.
Awesome. Thank you,
Wendy.
All right. Well, if there's no other questions or comments, I guess we will sign off. Thank you, the three of you, so much for doing this presentation. It was fantastic. Oh, I see there is a comment. Potato peeling usually have scabs to tear, so I wouldn't hesitate to use. I would hesitate to use them to eat.
You could always just kind of remove or peel off the scabs though, and then the peels that don't have those scabs, if you are hesitant eating it that way. But yeah, but it just makes for a little less discard or a little less waste that way. But
well, just one comment. I always save my potatoes to make sure I've got potatoes to plant the next year. And I did have to buy some this year, but I noticed that some of them that I bought were starting to sprout, which means I can probably plant those, right?
Yeah, totally. That's really good.
I mean, that's not usual. Usually I thought they treated potatoes so they, bought, but these have sprouts on them. So good.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, usually when you're looking to replant, sometimes they do recommend choosing organic because then they're not treated, right? But I've had potatoes start to sprout on me too, not intentionally, but they just started going at it. So yeah, that's really great, Linda.
Well, another thing, I have a friend who is an old man, not that I'm not old, but anyways, he told me that during the Depression, his family just planted potato peelings. And the potato peelings, as long as they've got, a little sprout or, whatever, they grew. So
that's interesting.
Yeah.
That'll give you guys something to try now.
Yeah. I'm
gonna try potato peels.
Something to add into the presentation. Thanks, Linda.
Yeah. Another suggestion I was thinking, I don't know if there's many like me, but I'd love someone to sometime talk about cooking for one.
That's a great idea.
When, look at, I cook for my family and whatever, and now I'm on my own, and that's a challenge. I cooked for my husband and 4 boys, and they ate everything and anything. And now when there's just one, I find it a challenge.
That's a really good point. Thanks, Linda.
Yeah, that's great. That's definitely something we can look at for this as well, because you're right. There are many people out there that experience that.
Right. Thank you for your presentation. You did a great job.
Thank you for coming, Linda.
Thanks for your feedback. That was great.
Yes.
So we're a little bit after 2 o'clock, so I suppose we should, we'll call it a day, but thank you again so much, you guys. That was a fantastic presentation, and I'm looking forward to being able to share it with other people. And again, best of luck to you as you're finishing off being a student and becoming dietitians. So congratulations as well.
Thank you, Ellen.
Thank you.